We are breaking into our regular programming now as these images are just coming through from the southern part of the Gaza Strip. We have this bombing taking place of various parts of it. It really does come against this backdrop of this 9-day-old ceasefire coming under increased strain. The Israeli army launching airstrikes in what they say is response to attacks that they say were carried out by Hamas militants against their forces. So that's the images at the moment of quite a lot of bombing taking place there on the Gaza Strip. Let's just get over and have a look at what's happening from the area itself and get over to Hani Mahmoud, who's standing by for us. Hani, what do we know about this latest round of strikes?
Rashad, this new wave of attacks already started a few hours ago. The Israeli military went full-scale, conducting air attacks across the southern part of the Strip, namely the northern part of Rafah City, the northern eastern part of Rafah City, as well as the central area with the Zawaida town in the northern western part of Deir al-Balah City, as well as the Nusayrat refugee camp toward the northern part. In fact, this refugee camp is where the area between the northern part of the Strip and the southern area of the Gaza Strip. And here earlier, Jabalia area, where the Israeli military has conducted several of the air attacks. The residents of these areas reported massive explosions that rocked their areas where they are sheltering or whether they are inside many of the remaining buildings in the area, but already causing several further civilian casualties, more damage to the already vast level of damage that is caused to these areas. The Israeli military is claiming that it is retaliating to attacks carried out earlier this morning by Al-Qassam Brigade and accusing Hamas of violating the ceasefire. In a response, in a statement released by Hamas, is responding by categorically refusing the allegations and claiming the Israeli allegations and claims are false and baseless and are directed to sabotage the agreement. Hamas denied involvement in the attack, denied being pre-knowledge of what happened earlier in Rafah City, and stated it clear that it adheres to the terms of the agreement. But up till this moment, the Israeli military is still conducting these air attacks. We could clearly hear the sound of a faded drone that hovered in the area in the past few minutes and went in the direction of the central area, where it seems most of these air attacks are concentrated at the moment. Just in the past hour, a service provider for broadcasting for media in Gaza across the Strip has been targeted. One person have been killed, reported, and another person also were at the vicinity of when the attacks happened.
Hani, what is Hamas saying about what's going on here? Because they're saying it's retaliatory.
Well, Hamas made it clear in a statement. It denied involvement in the attacks. It denied having any pre-knowledge of what happened, and accusing the Israeli military of using this as a tactic to sabotage and violate the ceasefire agreement that is already fragile. In the past couple days, we've seen how the Israeli military targeted and shot at family members who tried to reach their homes in the eastern part of the Gaza Strip, and that involves here eastern Gaza City as well as the central area, an area that the Israeli military has designated under the control of the yellow imaginary line that it has created. While the danger of this yellow imaginary line, it does not exist on the ground. There are no visible markings, no signs, and there are no indication whether a civilian can go or can't go in this area. So leaving many of the areas like residential cluster neighborhoods and streets quite deadly for many of the people who are not aware if they are actually entering a restricted zone by the Israeli military. Hamas is going further to accuse the Israeli military of creating facts on the ground and using this retaliation in order to make sure that this yellow line is established. And it has already eaten close to 60% of the Gaza Strip. And the fear now, if this has become a fact on the ground, it's going to be a grave threat to the ongoing already fragile ceasefire agreement between the two sides.
Hani, just also a bit more on this. I think you touched upon some of this. The thing is that what we have here at the moment are also some areas of undisciplined, unprofessional militias, some of which are understood perhaps, or they're claimed to be proxies of Israel. What more do you know about this?
Well, this has been made clearly by the Israeli military from the opening weeks of the genocide. Over the past 2 years, repeatedly we heard Israeli military officers from the political level talking about the necessary or the importance of establishing a buffer zone around the Gaza Strip, and that includes Rafah city, the whole city that at some point housed 250,000 Palestinians, all forced into displacement. The entire eastern part of the Strip, we're talking about the eastern side of Salahuddin Road. Salahuddin Road is one of the two lifeline roads connecting the northern part of the Strip with the southern part. Everything at the eastern side of this road is under the Israeli military control, as well as the northern part of the Strip. That includes one whole city, the city of Beit Hanun, with close to 200,000 people in that city been forced into displacement, and part of Beit Lahia and Jabalia. That's the buffer zone that the Israeli military, that it made sure to talk about it from day one and repeated the narrative that it's necessary for its own security. And right now what we're seeing here, not only it's eating up a major part of the Strip, close to 60%, cramming the vast majority of people into the central and the southern part of Gaza City, as well as putting more pressure on whatever left of the public services, but preventing and depriving people, displaced families, for the past 2 years from going back to their homes. And all of this, of course, has been feeding into this sense of permanent displacement that the Israeli military is adamant to make it a reality on the ground. And that's what we're seeing here. And it's a real threat to the agreement. And it looks like, from the pace and the patterns of the attacks, because this is not just the only wave of attacks that we've seen today. Over the past few days, particularly the past 2 days, the Israeli military killed at least 11 members of one family simply because they crossed the line that did not exist. They did not see it. There were no markings, no sign of it, to avoid it as they were trying to inspect their homes in the eastern part of the Zaytun neighborhood.
Hani, thank you. Hani Mahmoud there in Gaza City. Well, these are the images that we're just getting at the moment. With what we're hearing are 20 explosions take place, 20 strikes on the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Israel did say earlier that it did strike targets in the southern part of Gaza, saying that its troops had come under fire from Hamas militants. It is being seen in many ways as the first major test of that American-brokered ceasefire, which is now into its second week. It's meant to, of course, have halted more than 2 years of war. Health officials saying at least 9 Palestinians were killed. We're hearing perhaps that, according to the Associated Press, that there could be 7 further dead here as well. And also a senior Egyptian official involved in these ceasefire negotiations, or should I say mediations, saying that they were looking at round-the-clock contacts on both sides to try to de-escalate the situation. There we go. That's what we have at the moment, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directing the military to take strong action against any ceasefire violations. So that ceasefire at the moment hanging in the balance. Let's get to Hamdah Salhut. She's in Amman. She's in the Jordanian capital because Israel has banned Al Jazeera from reporting there and in the occupied West Bank. Hamdah, what on earth is going on here? It's one side blaming the other as usual.
Well, the Israeli military has just released a statement moments ago saying that, quote, in response to the blatant violations that Hamas committed to the ceasefire deal, the Israelis are now striking the southern part of the Gaza Strip with force and intensity. It's worth mentioning that at this hour, 6 p.m. local time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is convening his security chiefs to discuss not only what Israel is calling a response to ceasefire violations, even though Hamas has denied any sort of involvement in the incident on Sunday morning in Rafah, but also to Hamas's failure to release the remaining bodies of Israeli hostages that are still in Gaza. Hamas has said they need assistance on the ground in the form of heavy machinery and perhaps even search teams, but Israel says that answer is not good enough for them. But the Israelis knew for some time that this was going to be the case. Officials who spoke anonymously to Israeli media in recent weeks leading up to the ceasefire said that the Israeli premier knew for months that this was going to be the case, that it was going to be incredibly difficult and a daunting task to try and retrieve some of these bodies from the Gaza Strip. So Netanyahu and his government say that Hamas is going to pay a heavy price for that and what they are accusing Hamas of early on Sunday morning, even though Hamas says that they had no involvement and no knowledge of the incident.
So, I mean, where do we go from here? We've got Hamas also suggesting they would be releasing further bodies later on today. Does that also now, is that something now which is in jeopardy?
Well, Hamas said earlier on Sunday, after the first round of Israeli strikes, that they were able to locate one body of a deceased Israeli hostage and would be willing to hand it over to the International Committee of the Red Cross tonight if the situation in the field allowed them to do that, meaning if bombs were not falling from the sky. The Israelis say that this process needs to be expedited. It needs to happen as quickly as possible. But Hamas again says that it's a difficult situation because of the amount of rubble and debris that Gaza has because of Israel's war over the last 2 years. Now, we are expecting several high-profile visits in Israel tomorrow. On Monday, the American Vice President J.D. Vance, alongside the American envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who are supposed to be discussing the next round of Trump's 20-point plan. But Israeli officials have said that Netanyahu and his government are not really interested in doing that until all of the remaining 16 bodies are brought back from the Gaza Strip. It's also worth mentioning that President Trump just within the last hour gave an interview to American media saying that he had gotten a promise from Hamas that they are going to disarm, but there is no hard timeline as to when that's going to happen because Gaza, of course, is supposed to be in this post-war era with a lot of different transitions involved in this deal that no one seems to be concerned with for the next phase of it. So President Trump is adamant that he wants this plan to work, but the Israelis say that this is now going to be their way forward, that even though there's a ceasefire on the table, they are willing to go back to the fighting. They are willing to carry out any sort of course of action if they feel the ceasefire has been violated. But again, Hamas says they have no knowledge or no involvement whatsoever in the attack on Israeli forces in southern Gaza on Sunday morning.
Hamdah, thank you. Hamdah Salhut there joining us from Amman. Just recapping what's happening here. Well, we've had at least apparently 20 airstrikes take place on the southern part of the Gaza Strip in response to what the Israeli military forces are suggesting is a break in ceasefire terms by Hamas. Israel saying it struck targets in the southern part of the Strip after troops came under fire from Hamas militants. This really does represent perhaps the biggest test thus far of this US-brokered ceasefire, which is into its second week now, which is meant to halt more than 2 years of war. We've got health officials saying at least 9 people are dead here. We've got the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directing the military to take strong action against any ceasefire violations, but they actually have not threatened to return to war. Hani Mahmoud is still with us live in Gaza City. And Hani, what is the mood amongst Gazans there on the streets?
Well, fear and panic, and that's what we've been hearing from people. We've been approached just over the past 5 minutes that I was standing by, approached by at least 8 people here, including women and young people, asking if the war is back, if the Israeli military is going to resume the war. They even talked about they got the captives back, and now they're back on killing us. They were killing slowly Palestine, and now they're going back. That's the kind of sentiment that we hear from people. There is a real fear going on here, and it's growing by the hour now since the start of the wave of attacks earlier today. And it looks like as long as the Israeli military is not giving a clear and a straightforward answer to what's going on, the level of panic, the level of fear is going to be on the rise. Let's not forget, for 2 years, Palestinians were not given the opportunity an opportunity of respite, an opportunity just to breathe from the constant attacks. And it's just been 10 days, a little over 10 days, 11 or 12, and they're back on this, the sound of explosion, the sound of the drones. And in fact, for the past minutes, the faded sound of the drones is still going on here toward the eastern side. A fighter jet hovered in the area. And where we at, people are very, very concerned. This is where the vast majority of people who returned to the Gaza City and the northern part of the Strip could not find their homes standing, are cornered in this area. And the fear now that there might be something tragic going on if the Israeli military continues with its attacks across the Strip. And that's something that no one wants to see that happening at the moment. But again, panic and fear is dominating the scene right now.
Hani, what do we know about this possible release of a further body to the Israelis?
Well, Rashad, this is part of the ongoing effort to locate and return deceased captives buried under tons of rubble across the Gaza Strip. We're talking about not just Gaza City, but the whole entire Strip has been reduced to rubble. And in fact, every handover now is marking an end of one search and the beginning of another one. And the process itself, it's very dangerous, very slow, and very emotionally crushing for everyone here, because we're not only talking about Israeli captives inside the Gaza Strip. We're inside areas that were bombed by the Israeli militaries, but also thousands of Palestinians are buried underneath tons of debris and rubble across the Gaza Strip with no equipment, no heavy machinery, and no proper tools to do the cleanup and remove those bodies, recover them, and offer them a proper burial. That does not happen, and it causes much of the trauma and the emotional exhaustion for family members here. And the hope, if there is the attention that is being given to the Israeli captives, deceased captives inside the Gaza Strip, they will come to a point where enough attention will be also given, or an equal attention, to Palestinians buried underneath these pile of rubble. Hamas insists that it's doing its best, but the situations on the ground are very challenging with the level amount of rubble and debris caused by the constant bombardment over the past two years. Irshad, we've been into areas that was hard to recognize, given how none of the buildings were standing. We used to mark these areas by a school or by a clinic or by a famous coffee shop or a department store. Do not exist anymore. And we talk about as far as the eye can see, that have turned into dust. It will be very difficult to dig underneath the rubble and the pile of dust to find bodies underneath this.
Hani, Mahmoud for us in Gaza City. Just to recap what we have here, the Israeli military is saying in a statement that in response to the blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement earlier, the IDF, the military, has begun a series of strikes against Hamas terror targets in the southern Gaza Strip. The Hamas itself says that they came under fire first. The Israeli military launching these fresh strikes. We hear that there could have been as many as 20, or maybe a minimum of 20, take place in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Mahmoud Mushtaha is a Palestinian researcher from Gaza. He joins us now from London. Mahmoud, this is an attack by the Israeli military against what they say are Hamas targets, but it's maybe much more complicated. I believe your narrative is that Israel wants to take control of various proxies it has there and destabilize the Gaza Strip and eradicate Hamas that way and cause social and political mayhem.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, this is the 47 ceasefire violation in Gaza since the ceasefire start. About what's going now in the ground about attacking or rebombing Gaza again, because Hamas attacks the gangs or the militia groups in Gaza. It is like, especially after Trump's statement, it's like clear that any opportunity or chance for Palestinian self-government, it is distant than ever. We are talking about it is engineered disintegration from Israel and supported from US to ensure that no one can take Gaza or no one can control Gaza, just what Israel need. These gangs has long history of criminals, and now we are talking about not just criminals, but we are talking about a sanctioned proxy war where these criminals and where the Israeli forces, ICS facilitated and murder and drug traffickers.
So essentially, we'll see Gaza just perhaps sink into a divided society controlled by various fiefdoms. But, I mean, whose interest is that in?
Who is interested? Of course, Israel. When Israel and Netanyahu said like in a clear, is like he need like to ensure powerful clans in Gaza to destroy the Palestinian social infrastructure or fabric. We are not talking about political division in Gaza or clashes between two parties. No, we are talking about a group of Palestinian and a group of gangs need to sustain the safety in Gaza. Israel start to control Gaza not by just military attack, but also from its gang and also from its organization, which was before organized about Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's not just about like controlling Gaza or ensuring or to uncontrol Hamas, but it's about to destroy the social fabric in Gaza, to make it sure that no one else can take Gaza, and especially after the ceasefire, about sending international forces in Gaza and delaying of sending international forces to Gaza and sustain this growth by supporting from Israel. It's to make it clear that no any possibility for a state of Gaza or a state of Palestinian to be free and no civilian will be unsafe. So Israel need to make it for long term, to make Gaza for divided groups, divided militia, and to support in terms of interest of Israel.
Mahmoud, but the thing is, right, okay, is this a plan to sabotage the next part of the deal and beyond that? And if so, what do the mediators and the Washington interlocutors know about this?
Yeah, of course, like Washington or the media, especially like, the media reported like as Gaza or as Hamas are killing civilians in Gaza, but it is not what's going on in the ground. Like these gangs are looting food, control conveys, and attacking people. So these gangs from what they start to control the area, not in terms just like to be against Hamas or from the safety, just to support Israel from controlling what's going on the ground and keep the ground and Israel need. And it was clear from Trump. Trump at the beginning says that he has a green light for Hamas to resecure Gaza, to reestablish its control in Gaza. But now, as he announced that he needs to enter Gaza and to kill Hamas, and it's a clear violation of the ceasefire from the U.S., the sponsor of the ceasefire.
Mahmoud, thank you so much. Mahmoud Mushtaha there, a Palestinian researcher from Gaza, joining us.
Thank you.
Right, well, we can bring in Al Jazeera correspondent Nida Ibrahim, who is in the studio with me. And we've heard from the Israelis. What about the latest from Hamas following at least 20 airstrikes take place in the southern part of the Gaza Strip?
Well, Hamas seems adamant to the position it has been relaying since the morning, that there was no breach on their end from when it comes to the ceasefire. And they've been saying that the mediators and the guarantors have not provided any evidence that Hamas has indeed broken the ceasefire. And that goes in line with what we've been talking about in the past few days, that Israel was the party that was violating the ceasefire. The killing in Gaza did not stop ever since the ceasefire was brokered and went into effect. Also, the aid was not let into Gaza according to the plan. Not all of the bodies of Palestinians who were supposed to be released, as Hamas was saying, it will hand over the Israeli captives that it finds dead when it can. So we did not see a commitment from the Israeli side on that end of the bargain. And we are also talking about the Rafah crossing, the main and the only gateway for Gazans to the outside world that is yet to be opened. And instead, we are not just seeing Israel violating the ceasefire in so many different ways, but we're also seeing them attacking Hamas and saying, you know what? They're the ones who broke the ceasefire, so we have the right to respond to it. And I fear that this is the start of a very dangerous cycle of Israel pretending and claiming and saying every time it doesn't like something in Gaza that this is in breach of the ceasefire, for it to continue attacking Palestinians. The danger is that would put us in a position where it would be still called a ceasefire, yes, as fragile as it can be, but Israel can still bomb and attack Palestinians throughout what is called the ceasefire. And we have Lebanon as an example of that, where we see the Israeli forces continuously attack southern Lebanon, saying, oh, we've been attacking Hezbollah manufacturing weapons, or we've been attacking Hezbollah operators. So we are talking about a very dangerous situation. And unfortunately, it is not a surprise. We've known from the beginning that Israel would use every trick in the book to try and say, you know what, Hamas has been violating the ceasefire. And indeed, we've heard from Hamas earlier today saying that it was not their members who've attacked the groups of militias.
Well, this is what it comes down to as well, because, you know, Mahmoud Mushtahu, who we were just talking to, is saying that Israel now has its proxies on the Gaza Strip who are fighting Hamas, in effect. And they're not unified in any way. He's claiming that they would be setting up various fiefdoms throughout the enclave. Another thing is about that, how much do people know about this, and how much is this also in defense of those proximies, these airstrikes?
Well, some of the airstrikes that have been happening since the morning are in defense of these groups. It's not a secret that Israel not only has been supporting these groups with the territorial, allowing them to act on the territory of Gaza, but they've also been handing them weapons. We are talking about gangs that not only jeopardize Hamas's existence or Hamas's fighters on the ground, but we are talking about gangs that have been accused of looting aid, that have been accused of theft and crimes against Palestinians, which is why Hamas has been saying, we do not control any communication lines with the attacks that took, with the people who carried out the attack against the Abu Shabab militia, a Palestinian who's well known amongst people in Gaza, who's known to be a smuggler before the war started. He's known to be a part of a militia. Of course, he denies that in all of his interviews, including one with the Wall Street Journal, saying he's just trying to secure aid.
Yeah.
But what we know has been happening is looting of aid and giving it to Palestinians instead of it being distributed evenly.
OK, let's get over to Amman. Hamdah Salhut is there. Hamdah, we're hearing that what we have currently is the Israelis saying that they told Washington but didn't ask permission.
That's right. Quite a firm report coming in from an Israeli official to Israeli media saying that the Israelis notified Washington in advance of these attacks, but wasn't necessarily asking for permission. But the Trump administration says their focus is on diffusing the situation and wants the Israelis to focus on some sort of alternative for Hamas in Gaza and isolating them rather than a resumption of war. Now, other officials say that no one really wants to go back to the fighting. No one wants to go back to a full-scale war, but that the Israelis needed to send a message to Hamas that they are not going to accept any violations of the deal, and if need be, they would be willing to return to the fighting at any given time. At this hour, Benjamin Netanyahu is holding a security consultation with top officials and chiefs about next steps, about what Israel is going to continue to do. Is Israel going to continue conducting airstrikes, or are they going to stop? It's worth mentioning that there are also conversations between Israeli and American officials about the next phases of this deal and Israel's reluctance and hesitancy to move forward with it, since there are still 16 bodies of Israeli captives that are being held in Gaza. This is a huge issue in Israel, especially amongst the family members of those captives who say that the work is not over. They're certainly not endorsing any sort of return to war, but that they're blaming the government for letting things get this far, that if there was a resumption of the fighting, they fear that they are never going to get the remains of their loved ones back so that they can have closure after more than 2 years. But Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas is going to pay a price, that there is going to be a tough sort of situation ahead of them. And while he's meeting with his security chiefs, it's worth mentioning that many within his government want to go back to war. They want to go back to fighting. Many were against the ceasefire deal in the first place, seeing it as a political and military failure, seeing it as a defeat rather than a pathway forward, kind of defying what the Americans had put in place for everyone to get on board with in the first place. So while the Israelis are meeting, the statement from the Israeli military was quite clear that they are currently conducting these operations on what they're calling Hamas targets. But throughout the war, we've seen this repeatedly. When Israel claims that they're targeting some sort of Hamas infrastructure or fighter in the Strip, it is usually some sort of civilian infrastructure or civilians who are being targeted and killed in this war that has killed nearly 70,000 Palestinians millions and counting. But the Israelis say that whenever they feel the ceasefire is being violated, they are going to take matters into their own hands, despite Hamas saying that they had no involvement, that they had no idea what was even happening in southern Gaza. And now there are mediators here who are supposed to be guarantors of this deal, making sure that both sides uphold their end of the agreement, because these are two sides that have no trust in each other. There hasn't been trust, not just throughout the 2 years of fighting, but for so many decades before that. So while all of this is happening, the Americans and the mediators are now scrambling behind the scenes because they don't want this war to restart. They don't want all of this work and progress to go out the window. And the family members of captives and the large Israeli public who is behind this protest movement says they do not want a resumption of the war, because if that happens, there is no way the bodies of the captives could be retrieved.
Well, Hamdah, that's the point, isn't it, here? And many people on this programme have come on and said that once Benjamin Netanyahu gets the 20 living captives out of Gaza, well, he's done with that and all bets are off on any ceasefire holding.
Well, this was one of the main concerns, especially that Hamas had, but mediators essentially gave both sides these guarantees that that wasn't going to be the case. But Netanyahu and his government have already taken measures about the return or lack thereof of the bodies in Gaza. There are still 16 that are there. And the Israelis say that until that happens, that's when they're going to be willing to discuss the second phase of the deal. That's when they're willing to up the level of humanitarian assistance going in. And that's when things can be taken a little more seriously, because according to them, the first phase heavily revolves around the captives, around the bodies of the hostages that are still being held in Gaza. And Israel says Hamas didn't fulfill it, even though Hamas said that they need assistance on the ground. They need machines. They need search teams. Gaza is in ruins. It's in rubble. So where these bodies are, there needs to be this heavy machinery in order to remove the destruction so that these bodies can be exhumed. That, according to Hamas. But the Israelis say that it's not a good enough excuse. But despite this, Israeli officials who were speaking to media anonymously the weeks leading up to the ceasefire said that Netanyahu knew that this was the situation. He knew that this was going to be the case when we got up to this point because of the situation that had been created as a result of Israel's war. The damage and devastation in Gaza is quite extensive. We see it on our screens every day and have been for the last 2 years. So one could imagine the difficulties it would take to exhume not only the bodies of hostages, but of the tens of thousands of Palestinians who are buried under that ruin and that debris. So Israel says that they want this process expedited. They want it done as quickly as possible. But these airstrikes today on Sunday are counterproductive to that mission itself.
Hamdah, don't go anywhere. Hamdah Salhut there for us in Amman. Let's get over to Washington. Ross Jordan. Ross, any reaction out of the White House?
We don't have any reaction either from the White House or from the U.S. State Department. We've put out those requests for comment almost the moment that we saw the first images of those airstrikes inside Gaza. It's worth pointing out that just a few days ago, 2 senior U.S. advisors had said that they were not worried about the integrity of the ceasefire. They had argued to reporters that because the 20 living Israeli captives had been returned to their families, that this really was a significant moment in ensuring that the ceasefire would continue. However, as we have been hearing in the past half hour or so from our colleagues, there has been a lot of concern from many quarters about the integrity, about the stability behind this ceasefire. How quickly can some sort of interim security force be stood up in order to provide security to the people of Gaza? There was the statement released late on Saturday by the U.S. State Department saying that it has notified other parties that it had intelligence suggesting that Hamas was going to be launching attacks on Palestinian citizens inside Gaza, and that the U.S. would not tolerate that, and in fact threatened to possibly launch some sort of retaliation, I'm paraphrasing, if Hamas did not step away from what the U.S. had described as a concrete plan to attack Palestinian citizens. So there is already this tension. There's already this concern, this chatter in the atmosphere about whether this ceasefire can actually go beyond the first of the 20 steps in the Trump administration's plan, which 2 weeks ago Friday, Hamas and Israel had both said that they would sign on to. And then, of course, this time a week ago, we saw the steps leading up to the signing ceremony. Of course, this is something that is going to call into question the Trump administration's ability to try to keep this ceasefire on track. We are asking those questions to see what they are doing in order to try to make this a one-off, if indeed these airstrikes conducted by the Israeli military are designed to be a one-off, to make certain that you don't see a resumption of active hostilities inside Gaza.
I think you just alluded to it, but J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff are heading to the region this week to shore up this ceasefire. What more do we know about that trip?
Well, we don't know yet exactly when both the vice president and the president's special envoy are heading to the region. There have been numerous reports, numerous suggestions at first that Witkoff would have been in the region perhaps as early as today, Sunday, but that has not been confirmed. Now there is speculation that the two men might be traveling together in order to do this work. But of course, now that there are these airstrikes happening inside Gaza, that does raise questions about whether the administration is either redoubling its efforts to get top leaders into the region or whether it might pull back. We don't have any daylight on what that decision-making process is, but certainly the U.S. is putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that it was able to get parties to the table just about 7 days ago on Monday to sign this ceasefire agreement. Certainly, the U.S. President Donald Trump has put an incredible amount of personal diplomacy behind getting this ceasefire agreed to. And certainly, it would not do well for the administration if suddenly all-out fighting resumed. So it's speculation on my part, but I would assume that you're going to see an intensive redoubling of effort by the Trump administration in tandem with regional partners to try to keep this from becoming a resumption of active hostilities. Again, speculation, nothing concrete to suggest that that is, in fact, what's happening.
And there we go. That's Ros there. Ros Jordan, who's in Washington, giving us the upshot of what's happening over there. This is really in response to what we have been witnessing in southern Gaza of some 20 Israeli airstrikes taking place near Khan Yunis and near Rafah. We had the bombing of Rafah earlier on. Several Palestinians have been killed in this action, which Israel says is in response to Hamas breaking the ceasefire by attacking the IDF. Let's get more and get to Gaza City. Hani Mahmoud is there. And what more do we know here, Hani?
We're looking at a possibly large number of people killed in a school housing displaced Palestinians in the Nusayrat refugee camps. The attack was carried out in the past few minutes and already casualties reported to Al-Awda hospital. That's at the western part of a Nusayrat refugee camp. 3 people reported killed and 13 with the critical injuries. There are more still trapping under the rubble of the part of the school that was attacked. The attack happened while the school was full of displaced families. Many of these displaced families have moved into the school recently with their family members, reuniting with them after they were forced out of their homes from Gaza and the northern part of the Strip. So we're looking at double the number of people inside or displaced families inside the school when the attack happens. And as of now, there are more. The ambulance, the rescue workers are still recovering and rescuing those who might have survived the attacks from under the rubble and also the injuries to Al-Awda hospital. Al-Awda hospital is getting overcrowded now, so we're hearing also another line from a source on the ground that many of the ambulances are being directed to Al-Aqsa hospital because Al-Awda is a mid-sized small hospital. But this is part of ongoing attacks all day long. Close to 20 aerial attacks being conducted by the Israeli militaries, as many as 14 people and close to 25 of injuries across the Strip since the attack took place or started earlier this morning when the Israeli military issued a statement saying it is retaliating to a violation of the ceasefire, while Hamas categorically denied the allegations and saying the Israeli claims are false and baseless.
And Hani, this is coming against this backdrop of where we're seeing incremental moves to just getting some normality into the lives of Gazans.
Well, it's been very challenging, and I'm telling you, we're getting more people approaching this area and asking, very worried. We can see the worries on their faces, very concerned, very panicked. The fear is filling the air right now, as this possibly is going to endanger an already fragile ceasefire agreement. What scares people the most is going back and regressing to the past state of constant, ongoing bombardment, and saying the Israeli military never been honest about the terms of the agreement, and find it very now difficult to comply with the terms of the agreement. Let's just walk our viewers throughout what the Israeli military has been doing. It's been delaying the reopening of the Rafah crossings. It's been delaying the withdrawal, the second withdrawal from the what is the Israeli military is creating the yellow imaginary line. It's been deliberately preventing the entry of the full amount of aid, the number of trucks agreed upon. So we're seeing a scenario playing itself out, resembling what happened in January 25 in the first fire of the ceasefire, where the Israeli military failed to comply with the terms of the agreement. So we're seeing this happening one more time, and quite honestly, what we hear from people is rather the disappointment, rather the panic and the fear over the hope and the excitement that they had in the past few days.
Hani, thank you. Hani Mahmoud in Gaza City. We can get over now to Samuel Romani. He's Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Samuel, what are you making of the events of this Sunday thus far?
Well, I think it was an inevitable sign that after the original 20 living hostages were released, and then there were some slowdowns and delays in the releases of some of the bodies of the dead captives, and also some slowdowns in the disarmament of Hamas, that Israel would want to send some kind of a military message to them. And they've used the argument that Hamas and PIJ, Islamic Jihad, have carried out RPG and sniper attacks behind the yellow line in Rafah. And this means that Israel needs to respond to kind of restore deterrence and ensure compliance from Hamas. So it was entirely expected that Israel would do something. And an escalation of this scale seems to be a one-off aimed at forcing Hamas to comply.
My colleague Nida Ibrahim was saying, is this ceasefire going to then turn out to the one that is instituted in southern Lebanon?
Well, I think there's a lot of parallels towards what happened in southern Lebanon. I was hearing the coverage earlier today. I agree with that. I think that even, for example, just recently there was a UN personnel or peacekeeper that was targeted by Israeli attacks. And this is because in Lebanon, the core issues that were defining the border demarcation, some of the water rights issues, well, were not really Hezbollah's role in politics, have not been fully resolved. There were tensions between Israel and Lebanon even before October 7th. There was a flare-up in June of 2023 that really got this whole thing going. And the same thing is happening here in Palestine. And we don't have any agreement on a Palestinian state. We don't have any agreement on really who is going to replace Hamas and establish a governing authority. So as long as the core issues in Palestine, like in Lebanon, are unresolved, there's always prone to be escalations. And we're seeing Israel escalate here in Gaza in the same way as if they've escalated in Lebanon.
What about the employment by Israel? Reports of them, in effect, having proxies now to take on Hamas on the Gaza Strip and in effect, also create various fiefdoms.
Yes, I mean, there's been a lot of allegations coming through, especially from the Palestinian side, that many of these criminal gangs that are basically established in the Gaza Strip are proxies for Israel, aimed at sowing discord and sowing chaos and kind of tempting or baiting Hamas into escalations that might violate the ceasefire. And there's quite a number of them I think we should watch out for. There's Yasser Abu Shabab, who's a former drug trafficker from a Bedouin clan. There's the Al-Manzi gang, who are largely concentrated in northern Gaza Strip. There's something called the Counterterrorism Strike Force, which is kind of linked to ex-convicts in southern Gaza Strip. And there are a lot of rumors that Shin Bet, Netanyahu's inner circle and even senior Israeli figures like Avigdor Lieberman have provided covert weapons or funding for these groups. So this is obviously part of Israel's tactic to basically kind of create discord to weaken Hamas's ability to regain power and influence, and also force them to comply with the ceasefire on the terms that they've set.
Well, can Washington intervene? We've heard nothing from them on today's events thus far, at least.
Well, the view basically in Washington, and I think Steve Witkoff actually articulated this over the weekend in an interview, was that the Americans were quite frustrated by Israeli intransigence on this war, and they really wanted to kind of bring an end to it. But also, the Trump administration line has been, if Hamas does not hand over all the bodies of the hostages, does not disarm readily, or does not kind of basically abdicate its political role, the Israelis have the right to self-defense and to kind of strike back, and Hamas will either have to comply or be crushed. So I think that the U.S. is assuming that this is a one-off Israeli strike for now, is giving Netanyahu the free rein to do it. I don't expect to hear more from Washington unless this becomes a much larger conflict. So this becomes like with the ceasefire in November of 2023, or the second ceasefire when the second round of hostages were released earlier in the year, where there's a brief period of peace followed by a massive escalation. I think only a massive, sustained escalation will lead to America doing something or putting their foot down. For something like this, the Americans are going to let the Israelis make their own decisions.
But this is something which can go on at a low level, not saying today is particularly low, but for a long period of time.
Exactly. I mean, this is kind of the low boil attack that's kind of below the threshold of a major escalation, but enough to kind of continue to inflict damage to Palestinian civilians and enough to make the situation worse. We already saw a drone strike on the 14th targeting homes in the Gaza Strip that resulted in probably about 5 or 7 deaths, and it disrupted aid flows. We saw the next day some artillery and helicopter fire around Khan Yunis that blocked fuel shipments and led to the UN warning that the famine was going to get worse if these strikes continued. So as soon as the ceasefire was basically announced, there were a couple of smaller escalations, and this is kind of the third one in response to what Israel says is Hamas RPG attack. And now this one is going to cause even more disruption to the Rafah crossing aid distribution. So Israel's already done it 3 times in a week, and I think that this is probably going to continue for some time.
Death by 1,000 cuts. Thank you very much indeed, Samuel Ramani there, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. OK, getting from London to Amman now and getting to Hamdah Salhut. Hamdah, I understand that top Israeli officials have been speaking with the likes of the Vice President and indeed Jared Kushner, son-in-law of Donald Trump.
Well, the Israeli Minister for Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, has spoken to the American envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, both key players who were instrumental in securing this ceasefire deal. What the Americans basically said was for Israel to respond to whatever violations they felt necessary, but also to show restraint, because they are not looking for this deal to collapse. They are not looking or foreseeing this deal completely falling apart and having the work of President Trump and all of the mediators and guarantors who are behind it going to waste. The Israelis had apparently called the Americans and notified them ahead of time about these strikes, but weren't necessarily asking for permission, weren't necessarily asking for their blessing, so to speak. They told them that the ceasefire had been violated by Hamas. That's the accusation they were making, and that they were going to respond forcefully. At this hour, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is currently convening his top security chiefs and officials to talk about what's next, to talk about the fact that Hamas hasn't released the remaining 16 bodies of hostages still held in Gaza, to talk about what's going to happen with this next phase of the deal in the wake of a pretty high-profile visit in Israel tomorrow on Monday of Steve Witkoff, the American envoy, but also of the American vice president, who are going there to talk about the next steps in this peace plan, to talk about how they're going to move forward, what's next for Gaza. They certainly don't want to see a resumption of the war. So there are so many moving parts here, but the Israelis have said that they want the bodies back of the captives, that Hamas not releasing them was the first violation. That's the accusation accusation they're making. Hamas has said that they are willing to release whatever sort of remains they can find, but need assistance on the ground in the form of heavy machinery, in the forms of specialized teams. But the Israelis have not let specialized teams in. They're waiting on the other side of the Rafah border crossing. The Israelis have refused to open up the Rafah border crossing, citing the lack of return of the remaining bodies in Gaza, and also cutting the amount of humanitarian assistance in half. So those are all things Israel is doing, they say, in response to Hamas's initial violation. So there's a lot of back and forth here with pointing the finger at this party broke the ceasefire agreement, this party violated this part of the agreement. But the mediators are wanting all of this to stop. They want to talk about ways to move forward. What is going to be next for the Gaza Strip in a post-war era? How is Hamas going to bring about the remains of the deceased Israeli hostages and give them to the International Committee of the Red Cross tonight? Hamas says that they have located one additional body. How is that all going to take place if there are Israeli airstrikes that are coming from the sky? Hamas says that these are not conditions that are suitable for the release of a body, for a handover type of process. So the Americans are certainly wanting to urge calm and wanting to see the ceasefire agreement through, but the Israelis have said that they are going to respond in a tough way and that Hamas is, quote, going to learn a lesson.
Hamdah Salhut there in Amman. Let's get to D.C. and Ross Jordan. Ross, I'm sure you've been trying to engage, get some reaction at least from either the White House or the State Department. Have we had anything at all?
No comment from them yet, but there is new reporting coming out suggesting that there was a conversation between Israeli and U.S. officials before these strikes were launched. According to Axios, both Jared Kushner, who is the president's son-in-law, as well as Steve Witkoff, who is the president's special envoy for Gaza, apparently told Israeli officials that given that the Israelis wanted to respond to what they claim was a Hamas attack on Israeli forces, that they could respond, but the response needed to be proportionate, and the Israelis also needed to show restraint, underscoring, according to Axios, the Trump administration's desire to not see the ceasefire fall apart. They have worked very hard to try to bring parties to the table to actually get this agreement. The Trump administration has been celebrating what it considers a signal moment in global diplomacy, and it does not want to see this fall apart, certainly not 6 days after the signing in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Rose, thank you very much indeed for that. In fact, Rose, I do have a question, one final question here as well. What about any shuttle diplomacy in the offing here, and would it make a difference to what's happening in terms of a ceasefire, which is just hanging by a thread?
Well, certainly there had been the reporting and had been the very strong suggestions coming from the Trump administration that you were going to see Steve Witkoff returning to the region to help move into what U.S. officials have been calling the second phase of implementing the 20-point plan to end the war on Gaza. And then we also had reports that the U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, would also be going to the region, again, to help solidify the process of trying to permanently end the war. So it is fair to assume that the shuttle diplomacy is going to continue. But the big question is, do these airstrikes actually change the Trump administration's calculus on how hands-on it needs to be, or does it redouble the administration's commitment to be hands-on? Remember, this is an administration with a president who had campaigned on not getting the U.S. involved in global conflicts, in trying to pull the U.S. back from these global conflicts, in trying to mediate and trying to resolve conflicts so that the U.S. could put its energies into focusing on other priorities. But given the global acclamation for the signing of this ceasefire deal on Monday, this is probably something that you're going to see more action coming from the Trump White House rather than less.
Ros, thank you. Ros Jordan there in Washington. Just to recap what's been happening here, just over an hour ago, it is dark now on the Gaza Strip, but it was light when these attacks took place. At least 20 airstrikes taking place in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. We have Gaza Civil Defense Agency saying that a series of these strikes killed at least 15 people across the territory. We've got Israel and Hamas trading blame for violating this peace or ceasefire, as it were, as well. Both sides saying that, well, you attacked us, we attack you. So there we go. Hani Mahmoud is still live with us in Gaza City. Any further developments here, Hani?
Rashad, as soon as it got dark here, we heard the sound of explosion that was quite massive to the point we felt it was in this area. In fact, we heard smashed window glass falling to the ground of this area. And as soon as the sound was gone, we asked around and we verified where was this coming from. It's at the vicinity of an area that is close to a Shifa hospital. It's a drone strike. Still, the nature of the attack is not clear, whether that a tent or a group of people. It's not clear. There are conflicting reports. We're not going to confirm any of these, but that's at least what we're hearing from people who are at the area. But it caused a state of panic and fear, and it rocked the area. A lot of people here. We come across one vehicle here carrying displaced families. As soon as they arrived this area, they saw us here in position, wearing the vest. They asked us if the war is back on track, and they turned around, and we told them it's not clear what's going on. They turned around, they said, we're going back to our displacement site. That's how people are reacting now. There's a state of panic, state of fear already that has been going on, but in the past 10 days, it offered an opportunity of relief for people going back to their homes here, but that did not last very long. It is not clear how long is this escalation is going to last, and whether is it going for real to endanger an already fragile ceasefire across the Strip.
Hani, thanks. Hani Mahmoud, Gaza City. Let's actually get to Al Jazeera correspondent Nida Ibrahim, who's with me in the studio. We have some developments taking place. You've been monitoring social media and the like.
Yes, now I've been reading from the Israeli Broadcasting Authority, quoting Israeli sources saying that the political Escalon has decided to stop access of any aid into Gaza, closing all crossings leading there. As we've been saying earlier, Rafah has already been closed, but the little aid, the little few trucks that were allowed into Gaza are now going to be stopped, as Israel says this is being done in response to what they call Hamas breaching the ceasefire deal. And again, let's not forget that when we talk about the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who's been obsessed with staying in power.
And supply of aid until further notice. That's the key line that you mentioned.
Yes, and that will help him in his right-wing base when he talks about early elections. We have to remember that whenever Netanyahu talks about stopping aid, punishing Palestinians, killing them, his popularity amongst his right-wing base goes higher and higher. So this is a man who's going to use every trick in the book to try and establish a ceasefire that he's happy with, in the sense of he was pushed to take these measures and go forward with the ceasefire because of pressure by the U.S. President Donald Trump on Netanyahu. What he's trying to do now is create what his version is of a ceasefire, allowing him to stop aid, allowing him to keep attacking Palestinians and bombarding their homes and killing civilians, and allowing him to even issue threats, evacuation threats against Palestinians, like the one we've seen earlier today, telling Palestinians who are inside the yellow line, which effectively Israeli troops are still controlling on the ground. This is more than 50% of the total area of the Gaza Strip. So we are talking about the Israeli attempts to create a ceasefire that will allow them to continue doing what they've been doing before the war.
Nida, it's curious, but Donald Trump appeared on Fox News earlier today and said there was no hard timeline for Hamas to actually disarm.
Yes, but you have to remember that Israel has been using different excuses to say that it's targeting Palestinians in Gaza. And we cannot forget that earlier this morning, we've received a State Department statement saying that they're warning Hamas of going after these criminal gangs. And if they do, then the Israelis have the right to strike them somehow. Like, it's not verbatim, but this is kind of the gist of it. So it seems like the American Americans understand why Israel wants to attack and target Hamas, even though we had a statement from Hamas saying they had nothing to do, their members had nothing to do with what took place in Rafah earlier today, and that, these people do not have contact with the base. And we cannot forget that when we talk about criminal gangs, it's easy to find people who have personal vendettas against them. It's easy to find people who are already want to take revenge of the people who looted aid and smuggled drugs.
And who's going to enforce this? There's no security. There's no real mechanism there to prevent this.
And this is something that President Trump, when he was on board of Air Force One coming to the Middle East, has said. He said, I understand that there are bad people and that Hamas needs to restore order and fight these criminal gangs. It seems like the Israelis have gotten to him to try and change his position when it comes to what Hamas is doing in these areas. And again, the divide and conquer policy is an old policy as Israel's occupation. So they are sowing the seeds and planting the seeds of division amongst Palestinians and armed gangs.
Well, as we had our guest saying, this is exactly what it was, to leave Gaza, in effect, without a civil society, one which is effectively an anarchic entity.
And then blame Palestinians for it. When you create this dystopia and bomb a population for 2 years and then expect them not to have any problems and not to have any issues with security when they themselves cannot find homes to shelter them or food to bring their children, of course, this is the situation you're going to end up in.
Nida, thank you. Nida Ibrahim there. Okay. To just tell you about what has been happening, these images we received just over an hour ago from the southern part of the Gaza Strip, where Israel has struck targets there, saying that its troops came under fire from Hamas militants. Now, this is, of course, naturally, as you would imagine, being seen as the first major test of a US-brokered ceasefire, which is meant to halt more than 2 years of war. We've got to say that ceasefire has just entered its second week as well. Health officials saying at least 15 Palestinians have been killed. We've got, at the moment, the military of Israel saying that militants fired at troops in areas of Rafah City. This was earlier. This is not the resulting of that. These pictures are not of those particular bombings, but it's something which Hamas has strenuously denied and said they really at the moment are just seeing multiple violations by Israel against the terms of the ceasefire. Right, that's it from me, Rashad Salamat, for this news hour. Of course, you can